Listen to this for a moment and tell me what you think about it. I can't resign anymore. I can't call for a vote of confidence anymore because then this country would be ungovernable. And I will never work together with the AfD because I promised. How does this sentence from Friedrich Merz affect you? And yes, I have to say, when I heard that yesterday, I was extremely shocked that he is only running this country into the ground because of his own ego. And if you're wondering why I'm sitting here looking so ridiculous in front of this camera, I have a really bad lumbago, so my movement is a bit restricted. There will still be a video tomorrow, and I'd appreciate a like and subscription if you want to support the channel. Let's take a look at the disaster. Yes, you can see it up there, exactly these days left until the showdown in the Bundestag. Friedrich Merz will have to answer questions there about how things will continue here.
So, dear viewers, what about the promised reform package from the federal government? It was supposed to be put together before the summer break, but there are only a few days left.
They were able to reach an agreement, and now, hold on, there is no agreement. That means the reforms are off the table for now. They'll add a bit of window dressing. By the way, the healthcare reform won't happen like this either. They still need to make some improvements, so they really have to pay attention to the upcoming elections. Because a controversial study now says, yes, that 2/3 of Germans simply reject these reforms because they would affect themselves. While, however, 80% of all Germans are waiting for the urgently needed reforms here in Germany, just like everyone else. But not for me, urgently for other people. And that's why all reforms are now off the table. And that's exactly what he will explain to us in 4 days when it comes to the absolute showdown. By the way, I'll clarify something else in a moment. In fact, I accidentally assumed someone had a migration background in a femicide case, which has now come out, but I'll explain more about that in a moment. You should definitely listen to it. So make sure to watch this video all the way to the end, because it wasn't someone with a migration background, but actually a real bona fide German named Jan. And please don't immediately shout that he was a right-wing AfD supporter or something like that. That's not the case either, but I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment.
By July 1st, they want to have finally agreed on the key reforms regarding taxes, pensions, the labor market, and reducing bureaucracy. But Germany is tired of hoping, especially in light of the new dispute within the coalition. So almost 3/4 of the people in the country no longer believe in the timeline.
According to this extremely explosive survey, the timeline has been wiped out. I'll show it to you up there. You can already tell it's not that easy for you right now. So if this covers my face now, please forgive me. I can't move to the side. And you can basically see again in this image how the map has changed. At the same time, I'll show you my electoral district down here again to explain why it's almost no longer possible and why the CDU is now choosing not to tackle these reforms in this legislative term. So everything has been wiped away. The dispute, well, it's gotten so out of hand by now that it's reaching, yes, a boiling point. Why that is, we'll clarify now. Not yet.
That probably the statutory health insurance reform is now also on hold again for the time being.
So let's sum this up in a few bullet points. So the statutory health insurance reform is definitely on hold now. There won't be any reforms here. There's a huge problem. First of all, the East is now voting with Saxony-Anhalt and Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, where some polls are being deliberately and skillfully withheld because they know that, among other things, in Saxony-Anhalt, the AfD is now at 45% or higher. By the way, thank you. Thank you to the dear viewer. Also here, I can't really read my script properly. He sent me an Excel spreadsheet where he made the same projections. I then told him, yeah, I have a few different values because I adjust them based on the strength of the electoral district. It makes a lot more sense that, for example, in Saxony-Anhalt, 1, 2, or 3 more are gained than, for example, in Berlin, where the AfD tends to do very, very poorly, which has been further adjusted based on my values. But that's really advanced mathematics. I'll make another video about it, and that's when the original election polls eventually come to light, I promise. But now, as I said, people are afraid. Saxony, Anhalt, Mecklenburg, Vorpommern, then the state elections in Lower Saxony. You just saw that. I also included my own electoral district again, where we're now just barely behind the CDU. And at the same time, the state elections, the local elections in Osnabrück, and then the state elections in North Rhine-Westphalia are added on top of that. And then when the next ones are already coming up again, they agreed to maybe just beat the reform propaganda drum a little bit. And to say, yes, we need reforms, but to keep declaring that over and over, we can't just turn this heavy ship around. And the problem is then winter comes. And in winter, the budget has to be passed and the parliamentary sessions take place. And you still remember last year the nice constitutional judge who was supposed to take office. And what a disaster came up with the state of defense and so on, how it all escalated. People tend to get pretty agitated as winter approaches. That's why, because of the election campaign. Also because of the upcoming election campaigns, unfortunately, there can't be any more reforms here in Germany. But they just keep lying to you right up until the end of the term. Because then you don't have to be afraid that you promised something would get better and then it actually got worse.
What's happening now is that the Union and SPD want to get the states on board and make a few improvements. Another new gap of 2.5 billion has opened up here.
So, and they call it making improvements. And well, there's nothing better that could happen than sweeping everything off the table again right before the elections. And yes, in 2 weeks, then it's summer break, and then there will be the interview with the Chancellor. And then it will become clear to what extent this Chancellor is still willing to reform, and possibly in the fall, whether he might have to ask for a vote of confidence after all. If the Union drops to 18 or 17% because the Chancellor, he just has to stand up on the weekend and say the wrong thing again, cityscape, etc., and so on. Or the citizens should save more, work more, or maybe just give the German citizens a wooden board as a gift. You have to work more, that's what he did with his daughters too. This sentiment is once again extremely good for the CDU. But maybe during the summer break, you could also consider basically replacing this Chancellor. Just like swapping out a player or two on the German national team because they're not cool. In any case, the Union could now use the summer break to strategize and launch some polls to see who the Germans think would be the better Chancellor. With West, you already know that this move will backfire even more. Because they're afraid they'll alienate even more conservative voters. Some polling companies have already found that out again. So, the question remains extremely interesting. How will things continue here? And now I have a little clip for you. And then let's listen to what the clarification is and why it's so important to me to make this clear before any problems arise again.
There are more laws where the Union feels bubble bus is causing major delays, like with citizens' allowance.
So, and here I would like to make a clarification. Namely, last time I put someone under general suspicion regarding citizens' allowance, and it was about the father, Jan M., by the way, an absolutely typical German who stabbed his wife, his daughter, and also his son. This time it was absolutely base motives, and I am incredibly sorry that I thought there might be a migration background here again. However, I have to say the woman was a midwife, which is a very highly respected profession in my opinion, who works every day to make sure that no femicides happen here in Germany and that women should stand up against the patriarchy. At the same time, the man has now stated in court, and it's also important for me to say again that he claimed his marriage was simply unbearable and that he felt, well, worn down by his wife, so to speak, in quotation marks. Yes, also because of, well, the stress. At the same time, he said that a marriage is an extremely high financial burden. And here too, I want to say something about this because it's really, really important to me. First of all, I want to apologize for that. Secondly, by the way, I think that fits pretty well. I actually threw my back out just now. I feel terribly guilty because my wife will be standing behind the stove today, cleaning the apartment at the same time, and I can't help her. That means I got my kids involved today. They had to make jam and so on. Yes, and the second thing is we can definitely rule out that someone like that might have been affiliated with the AfD, which was very, very important to me for this atmosphere. And that's why I personally think conservative values are extremely important. Why? Well, because when I talk to conservative parents, none of them feel like it's an extreme burden, for example, if the woman does the cleaning. Because, well, maybe the man does less at home, maybe has a beer sometimes. Everyone can agree on that. But at the same time, I can also say that conservative people are more likely to give up this huge, yes, additional burden, maybe even the vacation. And I have to say clearly, yes, right now we're vacationing in Bad Maingarten and have been for years because we simply can't take a vacation like we used to. Because we save rather than throw money away. And I really have to say, guys, especially many from the left conservative bubble, just think about it for a moment. And I absolutely do not want to protect the perpetrator. What he did deserves a life sentence. But I would just like to maybe get you out of the left-wing bubble a little bit and say, dear women, if you maybe don't focus on ending the patriarchy, but instead just approach your husbands a little more, then maybe you won't have to be so afraid. Respect and approaching each other is the key. I definitely don't have to be afraid. Yeah, that if I spend the whole day back here in my broso and maybe watch a little TV, yeah, that someone might talk badly about me or even throw me out because I have a really bad lumbago. At the same time, I also don't have to be afraid that my wife or anyone will leave me or that there will be any arguments. And at some point, this pot is just full of arguments. And that seems to be what happened in this family, that the bomb just went off and nobody wanted to continue, and that a man just snapped. That doesn't justify it. I just want to tell you that sometimes it takes conservative values to bring people back down to earth a bit, approach each other a bit more, talk to each other, and not immediately dismiss everything as evil. And if midwives think that they should stand up at public demonstrations and end the patriarchy of men, then you are bringing violence into your own family. And that's evil and can, backfire. Maybe just reconsider things like that in the future and approach people and talk to people. Thank you.